David was running for his life, with no army, no supplies, and no plan beyond surviving one more day, away from a king who wanted him dead. David hadn't planned to end up in Nob. Just days earlier, he had barely escaped Saul's spear and been lowered out of a window at night by his own wife. He arrived hungry and alone at a small town of priests called Nob, just a few miles north of Jerusalem, a place the Bible barely mentions anywhere else. There lived Ahimelech, the high priest, a man who had no idea he was about to make the one decision that would destroy his entire town. David lied to him. He said he was on a secret mission for King Saul, that his men were waiting hidden nearby, and that he urgently needed food. Ahimelech had no ordinary bread in the sanctuary that day, only the sacred bread of the presence, the loaves only priests were ever allowed to eat. Ahimelech trembled the moment he saw David approaching alone. He asked immediately why the king's son-in-law would travel without a single soldier at his side. Nob was not a city of warriors or merchants. It was, above all else, a town of priests, entire families devoted to serving the tabernacle for generations. By law, the bread of the presence belonged only to priests, eaten inside the sanctuary itself, replaced fresh every single Sabbath as an offering to God. Ahimelech made an exception that day, asking only if David's men had kept themselves ritually pure, a small formality before handing over sacred, forbidden bread. Still, Ahimelech gave David the bread, and he gave him something more, the sword of Goliath wrapped in cloth behind the ephod since the day the giant fell. That sword had sat there since the day young David killed Goliath in the valley of Elah, kept ever since as a kind of trophy behind the ephod. He never once asked why a fugitive would need a weapon to run away. He simply trusted the word of a man he believed still served the king. But someone else was standing in that sanctuary that day, watching everything and saying absolutely nothing. His name was Doeg, an Edomite, a foreigner who served as the chief of Saul's shepherds, detained there for some kind of ritual purification before the Lord. Some translations call Doeg the chief of Saul's herdsmen, others the chief of his shepherds, but every version agrees he held real authority in that royal court. Why exactly he was detained at the tabernacle that day remains unclear. Some ancient readers guessed a vow, others a ritual impurity requiring days of separation. Nobody knows exactly why an Edomite held such a powerful position in Saul's court, or why he happened to be in Nob at that exact moment. David noticed him. He would later admit he saw Doeg there and understood even then that his presence meant danger for everyone in that town. But David left anyway. He took the bread, he took the sword, and he walked away, leaving Ahimelech and his family completely unaware of what was coming. Doeg said nothing that day. He simply watched, memorized every detail, and waited for the moment when that information would become valuable to someone else. Meanwhile, Saul sat under a tamarisk tree on a hill in Gibeah, spear in hand, surrounded by his officials, consumed by rage and suspicion. He had just learned that his own son Jonathan had made a covenant with David, and he accused his entire court of conspiring against him in silence. "None of you told me my son made a pact with the son of Jesse," Saul shouted. "None of you cared enough to warn me of this betrayal." That was the exact moment Doeg chose to speak, stepping forward from among the officials with the story he had been carrying since Nob. The officials surrounding Saul that day were mostly his own kinsmen, Benjaminites bound to him by tribe and blood, men who owed their positions to his favor. He told Saul everything, that he had seen David at Nob, that Ahimelech had inquired of the Lord for him, and that the priest had given him bread and a sword. Doeg didn't have to say another word. He knew exactly how Saul would react, and he knew exactly what would happen to the priests of Nob. Ahimelech's family had served as priests for generations, tracing their line back through the household of Eli long before Saul or David ever wore a crown. Saul immediately sent for Ahimelech and summoned every single priest from his father's household who lived in that small town of Nob. They arrived together, all 85 of them, men who had spent their entire lives serving God and had never once raised a hand against the king. Saul accused Ahimelech directly. "Why have you conspired against me with the son of Jesse, giving him bread, a sword, and inquiring of God for him?" Ahimelech answered calmly, without fear, explaining that David was known throughout the kingdom as Saul's most loyal servant, his own son-in-law, and the captain of his guard. He said he had done nothing that day he hadn't done many times before, and that he knew absolutely nothing about any conspiracy against the throne. Saul didn't listen. He had already decided the fate of every priest standing before him, and no explanation was going to change his mind that day. "You will surely die, Ahimelech," Saul declared, "you and your father's entire house, every single one of you, for what you have done to help my enemy." He turned to the guard standing near him and gave the order, "Kill the priests of the Lord, every last one of them, right where they stood." But something unexpected happened. The guards refused. Not one of them was willing to lift a hand against men they considered sacred, servants of God himself. Their silence enraged Saul even further. He looked around for someone, anyone, willing to carry out an order his own soldiers found unthinkable to obey. His eyes landed on Doeg, the foreigner, the one man in that court with no bond to the priesthood, no reverence for the tabernacle, nothing to lose. "You do it," Saul commanded, and Doeg didn't hesitate for even a moment, didn't ask a single question, didn't request any kind of justification. He turned on the priest himself and killed 85 men that day, every one of them wearing the linen ephod that marked them as servants of God. 85 men who had never fought a war, never held a weapon in battle, never done anything except pray, sacrifice, and serve a tabernacle in a quiet town. But Doeg wasn't finished. Saul's fury demanded more than the death of the priests themselves, and Doeg carried out every part of that horrifying order. He rode to Nob and struck down the entire town with the edge of the sword, men, women, children, and even nursing infants, without a single exception. He killed the oxen, the donkeys, and the sheep too, erasing every trace of life from a town that had existed only to serve God quietly. An entire community, generations of priestly families, disappeared from the earth in a single day because one man chose silence over mercy and loyalty over conscience. Only one person escaped. Abiathar, one of Ahimelech's sons, managed to flee the massacre and ran straight to David, carrying the ephod and the terrible news. When David heard what happened, he didn't celebrate his own survival. Instead, he said something that revealed just how heavy the guilt of that day truly was. "I knew that day when I saw Doeg there that he would surely tell Saul," David admitted. "I am responsible for the death of your father's entire house." David took Abiathar in, promised to protect him, and told him to stay close, because whoever sought David's life now also sought Abiathar's life too. But nowhere in that promise, nowhere in the chapters that follow, does the Bible ever mention Doeg again. Not his fate, not his death, not his punishment. The man who killed 85 priests of God and destroyed an entire town simply vanishes from the biblical record after that single devastating scene. There is no verse describing justice catching up to him, no battle where he falls, no plague, no curse fulfilled, nothing at all confirming what happened to Doeg. Centuries later, a psalm attributed to David, Psalm 52, is introduced with a note connecting it directly to this exact moment, when Doeg the Edomite had gone to Saul. That psalm calls him a man who loves evil more than good, who loves lying more than speaking truth, whose tongue is like a sharpened razor. It says the wicked man will be uprooted from the land of the living, torn away from his tent, but the psalm never confirms exactly how or when. Jewish tradition and later rabbinic writings tried to fill that silence, describing Doeg as brilliant, a scholar even, someone whose knowledge of the law was extraordinary. Some ancient commentators claimed his intelligence made his betrayal even worse, that he used his understanding of sacred law to justify the massacre in his own mind. Others said his name, meaning anxious or worried in Hebrew, foreshadowed a life haunted by guilt, even if guilt never once stopped his sword that day. But none of that comes from the biblical text itself. It comes from stories built around a gap the scripture deliberately, or perhaps accidentally, left open. Why would the Bible record such graphic detail about 85 murdered priests and an annihilated town, yet say absolutely nothing about what happened to the killer? Some scholars suggest Doeg simply returned to his role as Saul's chief shepherd, disappearing back into the background of a court already consumed by war and chaos. Others believe he died alongside Saul's forces later, an anonymous casualty of the same battles that eventually destroyed the king who once gave him that order. There's another theory, quieter but unsettling, that men like Doeg rarely appear again in any record, biblical or historical, because their purpose was only ever to be used once. He was a foreigner in Saul's court, an Edomite, from a nation the Israelites had a long and bitter history with, dating back to Jacob and Esau themselves. Some readers have wondered if his origin mattered to the story, if an outsider was chosen specifically because he had no personal stake in Israel's priesthood. An Israelite soldier might have hesitated the same way the royal guards did. Doeg, an Edomite with nothing sacred tying him to that tabernacle, apparently did not. That single detail changes how many people read this story, not just a tale of a jealous king, but a story about who societies choose to do their darkest work. Saul needed someone willing to kill priests without hesitation, and he found exactly that person standing quietly among his officials, waiting for his moment to matter. Doeg's information wasn't even false. Everything he told Saul about David at Nob was completely true, which makes his role even harder to categorize simply as a liar. He wasn't punished in the story for lying. He was remembered for telling the truth in exactly the way and at exactly the moment that caused the most damage. That distinction troubled ancient readers deeply. A man can destroy 85 lives without ever speaking a single false word, simply by choosing when and how to speak. A few ancient Greek manuscripts record a strikingly different number for that day, claiming as many as 305 priests were killed instead of 85. The massacre at Nob is often called one of the darkest moments involving Saul, a king already spiraling into paranoia, isolation, and increasingly violent decisions. But Doeg's role rarely receives the same attention Saul's does, even though he was the one hand that carried out an order every other soldier refused. He becomes almost a footnote in his own atrocity, remembered mostly through a single psalm rather than through any lasting narrative about his life or his end. Nob sat close enough to Jerusalem that later tradition claimed its priests could see the holy city from their own rooftops every single morning. Perhaps that absence is itself the point. The Bible spends enormous detail on victims, on David's guilt, and on Saul's madness, but almost nothing on the man who executed it all. It's as if Scripture refuses to give him the dignity of a complete story, denying him even the narrative closure given to far lesser figures throughout its pages. Compare that to Saul himself, whose death is described in painful, specific detail. A battle, a wound, a fall on his own sword, a clear and documented end. Doeg gets none of that. No death scene, no final confrontation, no moment of reckoning recorded anywhere in the text that so carefully tracked everyone else involved. Some later legends claim he was struck by leprosy. Others say he was killed by wild animals. Others insist he simply lived out his days in quiet obscurity. None of these claims come from the Bible itself. They are attempts across centuries to answer a question the original text seems to leave open on purpose. Later, rabbinic writers went further than any psalm, teaching that Doeg lost his entire share in the world to come because of what he did that day. Maybe the silence is a kind of judgment in itself, a story that refuses to even acknowledge what became of the man who caused so much death. Or maybe it's simply a gap in ancient record-keeping, one of many figures mentioned once, used once, and never tracked again once their purpose in the story ended. What we do know is this: 85 priests wearing the linen ephod died because one man chose to speak and one king chose to believe the worst. An entire town, women and children included, was erased from a map that barely mentioned it in the first place, all because of a decision made in a moment of fear. David carried that guilt for the rest of his life, protecting Abiathar as if protection could somehow undo a debt that could never truly be repaid. It's worth remembering that Saul's own guards were Israelites who refused this order on religious grounds, while Doeg, an outsider, felt no such restraint at all. Saul spiraled even further after that day, his reign increasingly marked by paranoia, isolation, and a growing list of people he no longer trusted around him. And Doeg simply disappears, walking out of the biblical record the same way he apparently walked into Nob that day. Quietly, without explanation, without consequence, recorded anywhere. A psalm remembers him as evil. Tradition remembers him as clever or cursed or haunted, but the actual historical text remembers him only for what he did in that one scene. Whatever the real number, whatever his exact title, one detail never changes across every version of this account. 85 men in linen ephods died because of him. No trial, no verse describing punishment, no confirmation of death. Just a single devastating act followed by complete and total silence for the rest of Scripture. It raises an uncomfortable question that lingers long after the story ends. Did Doeg ever face any consequence at all, or did he simply walk away? Perhaps that's the most unsettling part of this entire account, more than the swords, more than the 85 men, more than the destroyed town itself. Sometimes the people responsible for the darkest moments in these stories aren't punished on the page at all. They just fade into silence, unnamed and untracked. And the Bible, so detailed about the death of kings and prophets, never once tells us what ultimately happened to the man who killed 85 priests of God.